My name is David Hickson, and I'd like to welcome you to our 5th Trader Chat. The date is the 14th of September 2011, and before we get into the real subject of the day, we need to go through some disclaimers and some other housekeeping business. First of all, a disclaimer: you should be aware that all trading involves risk. Please be aware of and accept this risk before trading, and never trade with money you cannot afford to lose. You should also know that past performance of any trading methodology is no guarantee of future results, and I am making no representation in this webinar that any account will achieve profits or losses similar to those discussed. All results should be considered to be hypothetical unless otherwise specified, and hypothetical performance results have many inherent limitations and, unlike an actual performance record, do not represent actual trading. A few pointers about using NetViewer, the software we use for our webinars. NetViewer is interactive software, which is why we chose it. But nevertheless, the best way of interacting and asking questions is to type a message into the chat window. If you would like to speak, and if you have a headset, then you should right-click to indicate this, and please enter a chat message asking to speak, because many right-clicks are accidental, and it's a bit boring if I spend a long time trying to determine whether somebody's trying to speak. There is a slight delay in the audio which makes this the less preferred method, although we have been doing some tests, and that audio delay is much reduced in the new version of NetViewer that we are using, and so that's really becoming a very viable way of communicating with me. You should also be aware that a left click of your mouse in the NetViewer window displays a pointer with your name attached to it. It's very useful if you're talking or asking a question, but it is distracting if you're not, so please try to avoid this. We have our first-timer offer still running. If you're a first-timer, in other words, this is the first Trader Chat that you've attended, then you qualify for our first-timer special offer, which is a 20% discount on the purchase price of Sentient Trader. It's valid for 24 hours from the start of this webinar. If you'd like to take us up on the first-timer discount, then please send a private chat message to Paul Johnson, select Paul's name from the drop-down list in the chat window, and Paul will send you a discount coupon value for valid for 24 hours and instructions for making your purchase. Please make sure you send the message to Paul Johnson. We have one or two other Pauls in the webinar, I believe. And we have announced that we are going to be doing the sentient trading workshops again. They're very, very useful because, of course, as powerful as Sentient Trader is, there's nothing more dangerous than operating a power tool if you don't know how it works. And our trading workshops, our sentient trading workshops, are 3-day intensive workshops. We're planning them in Europe, Australia, and the USA. We have also had a tremendously strong interest in us holding online workshops instead of, or in addition to, the face-to-face 3-day workshops. Many of our users have contacted us and said, in the current economic climate, traveling and accommodation seems unnecessary. It doesn't do any good for your carbon footprint. What about putting together a form of an online workshop? And so we are putting together some ideas around that. The plans at the moment are probably to stretch the online workshop over 2 weekends, so that there's a week in between the sessions in which you can work on what you have learned the first weekend. We're still putting together those ideas and we are investigating it, but there has been a strong interest in that. If you have any ideas about attending an online workshop as opposed to a face-to-face workshop, if you like, in-person workshop, then please let us know, send us an email, or complete the survey, which is available on our website, and let us know that you would be interested in an online workshop. It is very possible that we will be moving in that direction, because the online workshop seems to be a popular option. Finally, we've had a great demand for paying for Sentient Trader over a 6-month period. Many people have contacted us and said, can we, instead of making a single payment, pay for it over spread payments? That is now possible. That's the really good news. It's now possible to pay for Sentient Trader over 6 months. If you'd like more information about that, go to our website and take a look at that Order Now page, or you can email us, and we'll give you all the details about that. Right, so let's move on to the main body of the conversation. I see one or two questions in the chat window, which I will come back to. Let's get started with the main body, and we're going to I'm going to try and turn on my video so that I can say hello to you in person, as it were. Using the video, there we go, you should see a box somewhere there saying that my video is available. Here I am in Italy, and so I'd like to welcome you personally to the Trader Chat. We've had several emails saying it'd be nice to have a little more personal contact during the webinar. So I'm doing that by putting on the camera. I'm not going to run the camera for the entire duration of the webinar because it is a little demanding on the internet requirements of the webinar, and in order to keep the webinar running really smoothly, I will be turning it off for the bulk of the webinar. But I thought I would connect with you visually, if you like, up at the beginning of the webinar and say hello and welcome you to the Trader Chat. And then at the end of the webinar, when we get to questions and so on, I'll when the webinar is winding down, I'll turn the camera on again, and we can communicate a little more personally. So let me turn that off again and move on to the main body of our chat. Today we are continuing with what we started last week. Last week I intended to speak about the two very important cyclic tools, the FLD and the VTL. The FLD is it's not a complex tool, but there's a tremendous amount of detail involved, and it took me the better part of an hour to talk about the FLD. And so today I'm going to pick up and speak about the VTL. And then I'm going to tie the VTL and the FLD together because the two of them work together and they're very important. So let's take a look at Sentient Trader. Here is the analysis that we've been speaking about over the last few weeks. This is the S&P 500. You should be familiar with it if you've been coming to previous webinars. If you're not, then you should know this is not a normal nominal model I'm working with. There is a 6-year cycle that I've included in this nominal model, which I believe is active at the moment in the S&P 500 and, in fact, all the US stock markets. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this as the basis for our discussion about the VTL. Let's start off, though, with some really sort of technical description, and let's take a look at what the VTL is mathematically. Now, VTL stands for valid trend line, and trend lines you will be familiar with if you know anything about classical technical analysis of financial prices. Trend lines are lines that tend to join either low prices in the market or high prices. That is what a trend line is. In fact, let me quickly pop up our whiteboard and just talk about trend lines in general. Let me turn that on, and I need to get a pen. A trend line will join price lows and price highs. So here's a price high, and there's another price high, and so a trend line drawn through those two price highs would be that kind of thing over there. Here are another two price highs, which I'm connecting with a trend line. Trend lines tend to indicate the direction of the trend, obviously of price at the moment. So this trend line is pointing downwards, so it indicates that the trend is moving downwards, and this trend line is moving up, and it indicates that the trend is moving up. You can also join price lows in the same way. So I could draw a trend line between those two price lows, or I could draw a trend line between these two price lows. And those are all trend lines. Those are trend lines that are moving in an upwards direction, formed by connecting price lows. That's what a trend line is. And there's a huge theory about trend lines, and there's a lot to say about it. I'm not going to dwell on that because what we're speaking about today is what Hurst called a valid trend line. And so what's the difference, you might ask, between a trend line and a valid trend line? Well, Hurst specified 3 specific rules which declare a trend line as being either valid or, of course, invalid. We're not interested in invalid trend lines. We're only interested in valid trend lines. Valid trend lines are trend lines which follow 3 rules. And those 3 rules are really very simple. The first rule is that valid trend lines connect the consecutive troughs or peaks of 2 cycles. Okay, Perhaps I should say that a little more carefully. Valid trend lines are trend lines that connect the peaks and or troughs of two consecutive cycles. Okay, so let me clear this. Whiteboard. I think I do that by doing that. No, I don't. Okay, there we go. So when we're talking about two consecutive cycles, remember that Hurst's cyclic principles state that price movement in financial markets is made up of an infinite number, the combination of an infinite number of cycles. So the first question is, what cycle are we talking about? And so it should become apparent that you can draw valid trend lines for each and every one of the cycles that you have found in your data. So you can see the semicircles that are used to represent the cycles in this particular chart, and you will see that we have many cycles that are being represented in the chart. The analysis has found many cycles in the data, and so we can draw a valid trend line for each and every single one of those cycles. How do we draw a valid trend line? Well, we need to join two troughs of two consecutive cycles. So let's have a look. Here is a cycle of the 54-month trough cycle. That's the 54-month cycle. That is one wave of it, one cycle of it. And here is another one which is not yet completed. How do we join the price troughs of two consecutive waves of the cycle? Simple. This is a trough here of the 54-month cycle, and this is a trough here. This is the consecutive trough, and when we draw a line that joins those two consecutive troughs, that is a valid trend line in that it obeys the first rule. They must be two troughs of two consecutive cycles. Let's have a look. Let me clear the whiteboard, and let's have a look at two consecutive troughs of the 18-month cycle. The 18-month cycle is this yellow cycle over here, and so there are. Actually, let me work over here because then I can show you more consecutive troughs. So this price trough over here and this price trough over here are two consecutive troughs of the 18-month cycle, so I can draw a valid trend line between those and extend it. However, this price trough and this price trough over here are not consecutive. Okay, there's a trough in between them, this trough over here. So a valid trend line of the 18-month cycle does not join those two troughs because they are not consecutive. That's one that fails. All right. However, let's move forward and say that this trough is a trough of the 18-month cycle, and this trough is the next consecutive trough of the 18-month cycle. So I could join those two troughs over there. All right. That's the first rule, that you need to join two consecutive price troughs or price peaks. Now, why would you join peaks? Well, you join peaks to draw what Hurst described as a downward VTL. In other words, it's a VTL that points downwards. So here's a peak of the 40-week cycle. Here's the next consecutive peak of the 40-week cycle. If I connect them, let me clear the whiteboard so it doesn't get confusing. Here is a peak of the 40-week cycle, all right, this cycle over here, and here's the consecutive, the next cycle. That's the peak, and that's the next peak. If I join those two points, then I get a valid trend line according to our first rule. I've connected two consecutive peaks, all right, and that is a downward pointing VTL, right? As we move from left to right across the chart, the VTL travels downward. Now, if I connected the two consecutive troughs of that 40-week cycle, that would be a trough over here, and it would be a